Okay, hello, and welcome to this next episode of Tabletop Tabletalk. I am excited to sit here and talk with all of you today. I want to talk about session scope and then delve into maps, encounters, and more. Before I dive into that, I want to talk about two things. First off, I want to talk about you might have seen the announcement that Roll20Con is happening next month. It is happening October 23rd to the 25th. It's going to be 3 days of gaming for charity. There are so many details about it. And then if you want to see more, please go here and check it out. Boom, there is more information on there. And thank you again to the mods and everything. And I will make sure that this information is available for those of you watching on YouTube as well later so that you can get to it. The second thing is partially related to Roll20Con, but just in general, we are as well still raising money for Code 2040. If you don't know about Code 2040, it is a charity organization that we work with in a bunch of different ways. They focus especially on helping people of color and using messages to improve programming, gaming, and all that sort of medium, which you can probably guess from looking at me and seeing what I do how important that stuff is to me. So we will have the rest of those links available for all of you. Good morning, good evening. I'm happy to have you here. I'm excited to get back into this. I have a little bit better of a setup, as you can probably see. There's a nice green screen behind me. My microphone has actually been improved. I found a software that allows me to record while having my air conditioner on and pull the audio out so that you do not have to hear the background and I don't have to suffer from this terrifying sense of weather that is fluctuating more than most of my D&D encounters. So, hi, I'm GabeJamesGames. I am here to help you either become a GM, feel like you can be a better GM, or a mix of the two. You can create countless amazing things, and you may just need the opportunity to do so. I want to try to give you that opportunity, that motivation, and that enthusiasm. Because if there was ever a question, yes, you do deserve that. So right off the bat, we've talked about GM. We've talked about being a facilitator. We've talked about being a narrator. We've talked about being a guide. There are dozens of different ways to view it and to approach it. We talked about what it is. Let's talk about how to be. You don't have to have everything prepared to be a good GM in my stance. I'd argue some of the best GMs that I've played with were the least prepared. If during this time you sit down with me to talk, listen, and develop, and become a better GM, that's what I want out of this. That's why I do this. That's why I wanted this. I have been the person who has 13 pages of notes and details and NPCs and locations. And I have been the person with 3 paragraphs. And neither circumstance is necessarily better. And it varies a lot because the people that I play with are different. The people that I play with may be very narrative driven and focused on what they want to do and what they want to see. And the others might want to run around and cause as much chaos as they can, and I can only prepare for so much chaos. And I say that as someone who willingly creates plenty of chaos. And I've watched plenty of shows, especially talk shows, where they talk at you. And for a lot of ways, that works in many mediums. That's not per se what I want to do, especially since we can do it in a live fashion. When people talk at you, they give you dozens of info. It can be a lot. We also learn from practicing and practical application. So we say as a joke a little bit, grab your pens, pencils, and start taking notes. But I would say grab something for taking notes. Even if you're just opening up in a notepad, even if you're just writing out something on your phone, if you're watching on YouTube, you can technically pause it And if you're not, well, take a second to pull something up, because today I want to go through a couple things. You can call them exercises, tests, brain stretches, whatever you would like to call it. There's going to be a couple things throughout the show today that I want to do with you, and then see how different we came up with ideas with the same sort of prompt. So go ahead, grab something, open up something. Ba-da-ba, ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da. This is your wedding music. Ba-da-ba-ba, 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 ba. But all right, I'm done. That. Anyways, so first off, right off the bat, I said session scope. When you're playing with a group, regardless of what system you're playing, having an idea of how far things can go and how far you're comfortable with things going is important. You don't have to have a hard line, but just have an idea. You might decide in this session, they're specifically going to rob this extremely guarded cyborg entity. And that could be what you prepare for. And you come up with a map, a visual, different locations for NPCs. You are prepared for your party to tackle this. And maybe they go completely offhand and never actually go there. So that's why it's important to figure out a session scope. Because if they go off track, you might need to bring them back. Or figure out a way to bring it back. Figure out a way to approach it. Figure out a way to bounce back to it. I used to struggle with this a lot, and I still sometimes struggle with it because I'm trying to get a difference between railroading and guiding. And I'll even go into that a little bit later too. But on the opposite, when you think of getting them to where they need to be and where you want them to be, that's why we talked about communication a little bit before. So if you build 30 maps, you might have a map for everything that happens, but you might not be prepared for the things that they do. So when you go into a session, when you go into playing and encounter a situation with your party, I want you to ask, whether it's yourself or the party, what is the plan? Or ask them a week ahead. Ask them a few days ahead as you're getting your plans together. What is it specifically that the rest of you wanted to do? And I'm sure there have been plenty of times a GM has asked you this, because when they have that preparedness, when we have that idea, then we can work around it. When we have that notion of what we're going to figure out, what we're going to delve into, then we can plan it out. If the party mentions that they're planning to go do something, it's an amazing opportunity to figure out what it might look like. But then it's also gauging how in depth to plan and focus out and figure out that core idea. Because it might be something that they mentioned, but they don't want to do until 10 steps later. And yes, if you have questions, please feel free to put the word question in all caps before it, and then I will actually do a Q&A for just go through the questions that you have. If you are on YouTube, feel free to put questions in the comments, and I may even try to do a short segment of that or approach some of those at the end of some of these streams. Yeah. So being prepared and being over-prepared is not a bad thing. It means that you're planning ahead and you have a variety of ideas that you're figuring out how to execute them and do it properly. If you ever come across a circumstance where your party isn't going where you want them to be, how do you get them there? So in the last stream, in the last video, I talked about making it a narrative fluid combination. If you have two members of the party that wanted to go somewhere specifically, but one member of the party really wanted to go back to that tavern, lead them back to the tavern, because the person they were looking for is wherever the rest of the party wants to go. Then you're fusing it together. Then it's a way of, instead of trying to railroad them, you're trying to guide them with the reward, the incentive of what they're interested in, what they want, and putting them in the same place. Railroading can come from GMs and party members. It's kind of just a general thing that people do, even unintentional. It's pressing someone into doing something by rushing them or coercing them. And there are some circumstances where railroading isn't a bad thing. Yeah, I agree. Because you're trying to guide them. It becomes a conflict when there is the butting heads. If you're playing a specific adventure, or you're playing in a show like a lot of people do with streams, it's actually sometimes important because you only have so much time. You only have so many days that you can run through this thing. If you're having a one-shot, railroading can be something that you have to go into. There have been plenty of times when I was DMing a one-shot for either stream games or home games, and we had 3 or 4 hours, which means I had to get them from point A to B in 3 or 4 hours. Now, if I wanted to do it by moving the story forward, or if I wanted to do that by trying to give them that opportunity to make that decision and then wait and then hope that they would take that bait, take that immersion, take that gift, that idea that I gave to them. Figure out the way that you want to lead them there, or figure out a way that you can incentivize them to go there on their own. Tell them something like, well, actually, if you arrive this soon, then this thing will happen. And if you arrive this, like a few days later, there's less of a chance of this, but more of a chance of this. And if you don't even go there for a week, it's likely that this thing will happen. Because then that incentivizes role playing, and it incentivizes planning, processing, and progression. I don't do it as much, but I do sometimes have sessions, and I'll tell the entire player group, when we are in the party, the party is running around, depending on how long you take in these different places, the world will change. The world will be different. Things will happen. And I'm not saying that because I want the party to be rushed. But one of the things that I've been practicing more as a GM is that as real-time events slow down and they do more, the world keeps going. The world is alive. If the party decides they want to spend so much time laughing, talking, doing something when they have a meeting with somebody, there is nothing wrong with that. What I like to do is then change what could happen at the meeting. And it's not in a way that's going to be punishing either. Because there could be a sense where if they're sitting there talking in a tavern about what they want to do, and then they decide, you know what, we're just going to keep talking, we can go see that person whenever we want to. Make an interesting choice as a GM. And this is the first prompt that I want you to figure out with me. And then we'll just go through some of the ideas that you came up with. There is a circumstance where you have a fantasy party that is sitting in a tavern. And they have to go meet an armorsmith who seems to be working with a cursed weapon. Or they have a cursed weapon in their possession. Something along those lines. And the party knows this, and they're figuring out what they want to do with it. They're figuring out how they want to approach it. They'd spoken to them before, and nothing was wrong. Nothing was happening. They didn't see the weapon, but they knew it was there. Now they have confirmation that it's there, and they need to go talk to this person. So if your party decides to, instead of going directly there and talking to the armorsmith, approaching them, mentioning the cursed weapon, if they decide to take that more time sitting, talking, planning out, and understandably and intriguingly role-playing and having fun and sitting and discussing, but you also still want the world to progress. You want to see the world change and be influenced. What would be an interesting thing that happens if your party, after finding this out, maybe doesn't go see the armorsmith for a day, for 2 days? What is something that you think would be interesting to happen? Does the weapon disappear? Does the weapon take over the armorsmith? Does someone buy the weapon and something happens? And this is the sort of thing you never actually even have to tell the party unless you want to. If you want the party to have that idea, if you want the party to know, by the way, well, actually, if you had come here early, or even if you tell them ahead of time, depending on how fast you act, different things will occur. And you don't even have to say it in a way that's like different things are bad, because waiting can be a good thing. Waiting could be a fantastic event. But again, I'm curious. What do you think would be something interesting to happen if they didn't go and talk to that armorsmith with the cursed weapon immediately? What would be an interesting twist? So yeah, one person just said the armorsmith sold the weapon. I like that, because if they didn't go and the armorsmith sold the weapon, then it's gone. Then they have to find this person. They have to pursue this person. They have to figure out how to get the weapon back. They have to make sure this weapon did not curse them. They have to make sure this weapon did not affect this person. They have to make sure this person does not know what the weapon is. The world changes. Someone else said another adventuring party started the quest. I like that. If they don't pursue it, if they don't jump into it, if they don't get that weapon, and then another adventuring party actually took the cursed weapon to go do something with it, what do they do? Do they trust the adventuring party with it? Do they think the adventuring party has good or bad intentions? Because this is that idea of when you figure out the scope of what you want, even if you start small and then build it up progressively, you can expand. And now the way the party reacts, it's like, okay, they really care about this thing. Let me go further into it. Let me build up on it. Or if someone else takes it, or another adventuring party starts that quest and then resolves it, the party might be like, actually not that concerned about it. And then you only have to go as further as you would like to. If that is a thing you would like to develop more and more, you absolutely can. But you now have a gauge of what their engagement of that. You have a scope of what their interest in that quest line is. A family member of the armorsmith could find the party in a tavern on the road. They could come approach the party and say, I've actually seen it affecting them. It terrifies me. I hear them mumbling in their sleep. They're talking about the curse, the curse, the curse, over and over. And that's why I love building up on that stuff. You give them that opportunity and you keep the world flowing. And whenever I give you a topic I talk about the topic on this, the word comes up a dozen times at least. Because what is the scope of the world like for you when you build it? What is the scope of the time as your characters are in this world? Does it stop like it's a cutscene when your party is discussing? Or is it still flowing, regardless of what they do? Because there's no right answer to this in a singular way. There are right answers for individual parties. One party might be perfect for the stop and gauge because they might make split-second decisions. And another party might literally want that world to keep moving. Because if they wait, then something interesting might happen, or a story might completely change. And they might wait and wait and wait, and that's why scope for what you build changes. Because you could have planned for them to go deal with this encounter. You could have planned out the map for this encounter. You could have planned out the visuals for this entire scene if they went immediately. If they wait a week, it could look different. If they wait a month, it could look different. If they entirely forget about it, it could look different. And I know so well the feeling of a little frustration of wanting people to see something and then not getting the chance to share it. And then I know the feeling of deciding, do I motivate my party to go there, or do I just wait it out and let it happen? And depending on your party, it's different. So the reason I wanted to do that little exercise, that little discussion, is because I have watched plenty of shows like this one here. And oftentimes someone is talking at you. And it's a lot of information. I know it's a lot of information because I'm telling you the information. And I'm thinking of this stuff and I'm planning it out and I'm processing it. And I have like a little note sheet for myself and a guide. But I also know that when you're just listening and trying to take in the information, sometimes it's a lot to process and it's hard. So even if nothing else that you take from it, you take the idea of that fluid world and then that little circumstance we came up with, that's fantastic. Because that's something that you can take away. That's something that you did. That's something you learned. And that's something that you can do. I've said it once. I've said it twice. I'll say it 1,000 times. My job is to try to get you more comfortable to do more for your games in a way that makes it easier, in a way that makes it more fun, or in a way that you feel like you're at least improving and growing and developing. That's one of the best things about being a storyteller. There are infinite stories to tell and different ways to do it in ways we might have never even considered. So let's see. Maps. I love maps so much. I on the marketplace, I've actually bought, and I'm not gonna tell you a fool. I'm not gonna tell you a dollar value of how many maps I've bought. But I have bought plenty. Oh. And one of the reasons that I like maps is because I like giving people a visual. I am a big fan of theater of the mind as well as visual representation. Honestly, I actually use maps sometimes just for myself. I've had times when my party doesn't necessarily want to see a visual of what's happening as much. Or even if they do, they might just want to have theater of the mind for a circumstance. They might want to have theater of mind for a town. So if you're a person running the game, This feels like a weird sentence, but it's one I had to learn. You're allowed to just build maps for yourself. As a GM, you're allowed to just make maps for you to get a visual gauge of what you want to see. I would almost always make maps for the party because I thought that that's what they needed to see, and never really thought about doing it as a reference for myself. And then I started to do it. I started to place the tokens around. I started to put the scene together. I started to decide how dense the brush was. And then it became not just a visual in my head, but a visual on paper, a visual on computer, a visual with actual pictures that I can move around, rearrange. And that's why having digital maps is so great. You have this idea for a castle in your head. You want them to charge into the castle. You want them to plow through the skeletal guards. You want them to get into the courtyard. And you want this to be a fast progression. Where they are located as they're doing all of this might not matter in depth in the moment. But for yourself, when you're planning, just knowing where they are, knowing where they are physically located, could be exactly what you need. If you have an actual location for the two skeletons sitting outside of the castle, and then you put on your map the two skeletons that are right inside, you know where they are. And when the players tell you what they're doing, when you're sitting there and your party decides one member is going to walk through, you know where they are. You can keep a gauge of everything that's happening. Build maps for you. Yes, I agree. Mood boards are a beautiful thing. Mood boards might even inspire you of how you want your map to be. And if you can, there's not a better circumstance. There is not, in my opinion, a superiority of making a map versus using one that's pre-made, because they can have different functions. And it's okay to reuse maps that you've used. That's absolutely okay. Because the circumstance of where they are, the encounter, the people, the situation can be very much different. I've reused a bandit map, I think at least 4 times that I had. And every time my party was in it, they loved it. Every time my party used it, it was never they're redoing, he's redoing that map again, because there would be things in different locations. There would be new chests, there would be new hidden things. I might have rotated a little bit, but it was still essentially the same. When you are a storyteller, it's okay to reuse ideas because you can always make changes that still make it a fresh experience. So you might have had a map that you spent hours on putting together, and you only got to use it once. Rearrange a couple pieces. You don't have to build an entirely new circumstance for an entirely new experience to take place. Take that time to build the thing you want, and then switch it around. Sometimes when I build maps, I literally just use a pen and paper. Other times I use directly Roll20's grid map because I can expand it and it actually makes all of the grids just noted on top. There's so many applications of how you can do that. So many different programs. The possibilities are literally endless. So let's get a little bit into the more, because I did say maps, encounters, and more. I'm coming back to the encounters. if you haven't come up with a soul map for them, but you have ideas or you have a folder of maps that you want to use, you have a folder of different areas, you have a folder of taverns, you have a folder of forests, you have a folder of castles or anything else. Here is something that I would like you to test with your party. Because as you're figuring out the scope of what your session is going to be, I've said it again before, and as I've said with so many things, I'll say it again. Ask. When they walk into a tavern, you don't have to have an idea. If you want to test your improvisation skills, good Lord. Could have just said improv skills. Anyways, if you want to test your improv skills, if you want to test theirs, if you want to just give them the opportunity to set that stage for themselves, ask. You walk into a tavern. What does it look like? Because that's a situation where you're giving them this opportunity. You're giving them this moment to think, oh, I can actually make this look like whatever I want. Give them that circumstance. And what do they come up with? So right now, I'm asking each of you, and then I'll tell you what mine looks like after I think of it. You walk into this tavern. What does it look like? It can be anything. You can go as detailed as you'd want, and you can go as loose as you want. And yeah, I believe when you ask your party to tell you what something looks like, looking like a deer in the headlights. Because I don't feel like there's enough of a back and forth world building experience between the party and the GM yet. I don't think that it's normal yet, even though I feel like it should be. I don't think there's a lot of the collaboration enough yet. That's just a commonplace thing. And I feel like there should be. And I'm excited to see it more. I've asked a party member what a tavern looks like before. They gave me essentially a clown tavern. I absolutely started cackling. I had never planned for it, and they kept going back. They kept going back. They came up with a drink called a Bobo shot. And it was the most ridiculous thing, but it was so much fun. And from that notion, I just kept building up on it. So someone gave a perfect example. Tiny Kiwi said, the smell of fresh baked bread is the first thing you notice. There's a few tables around with people eating and laughing. It's a warm place. And right then and there, even if unintentional, even in a sly way, you're giving your party the example, you're giving the party the opportunity to create a situation, a vibe, and a feeling that they want to see. You don't have to say, what sort of tavern would you like? What sort of bandit camp experience is this? It's giving them the circumstance to literally, well, this is actually what I would like the tavern to be like. And it might be ridiculous. It might not be everyone's thing. You could even make it a collaborative experience. So we'll say I have a party of 4. And I'm trying to figure out, I know they're going to a tavern. I don't know what this tavern experience is going to be like. I don't know how far it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to lead. But what I can do is prepare some questions to answer. Ooh, dark wood and shadows. The smell of ale and sweet assault your nose. Clever, Steve. But so I have these questions. I have these questions for this party, right? I have 4 party members, And I'm going to ask each of them a different question. That way, each of them is a part of this tavern building process in this moment. I look at the first one, and I ask, you walk into this tavern. What is the first thing that you notice? Well, and you know what? I'm going to use a couple of what you say right here. The first thing that I notice is the smell of fresh baked bread. There's a few tables around with people eating and laughing, and it's a warm place. I like it. Okay. I go up to the second person. What's the second thing you notice? I notice there's actually dark wood around the room. And a lot of shadows. Not overwhelming, but the lighting. Then I think I actually get the smell of ale and sweat. So even it mixes in with the bread. It's a comfortable place. Maybe someplace adventurers come. Okay. Right there, with those two answers, we started building what this tavern experience is like. Then I'll ask the third person, what does the innkeeper look like? Well, actually, I think the innkeeper is almost like a lizard folk who's washing a cup while pouring a drink with their tail. They've got bright green scales and a tattoo along their back. Interesting. And then the fourth person. What does it sound like? I think it's actually pretty rowdy. I think it's people are laughing and singing and happy and cheering, and someone might be singing badly, and maybe the lizard folk bartender is talking to someone and they told a terrible joke and they're laughing. So right there, those 4 questions. You don't have to ask those questions. You don't have to ask a bunch of questions. You can ask vague questions or detailed questions. You can come with a pre-prepared idea because this is the scope that you are building up. But that doesn't mean the party can't take some of that weight off. The party can't help you figure some of that out. Because there's going to be really interesting, strange, unique, exciting ideas you never came up with, including Clown Tavern, Bobo's Beautiful Bizarre Bar, B4. Beautiful Bizarre Bar. I guess that's 5. But it was something I never forgot. And it's something I still think about. And it ended up leading to basically 3 different adventures because we were just playing and just exploring the world. And there are going to be circumstances where you ask them questions and they don't have an answer. And you might have to guide them a little bit, or you can give suggestions. You could literally say, do you think it's more of a happy vibe in here, or is it a little more like reserved, kind of roguish? Is it a place where people come and maybe they're like the thieves, the scouts, the rogues? Because it might be too vague at first, and then as you ask the prompts and like lean into it with them, then they'll become more comfortable. And then as that happens, they'll start to do it more. And then, if we're lucky, fingers crossed, giving them those prompts, those ideas, that comfort, that world building involvement, it might make them start thinking a bit more of like a GM. It might make them a little more comfortable about being a GM. It might make them consider, maybe I can do this. Because right before, when I asked each of you, you came up with ideas, which shows that you can do this. You can work with a scope and build it up. Because the small scope that we had was a tavern. And then it was just putting out ideas and working it into the story. And even 2, 3, 4 different ideas that may seem completely unrelated can still come together because we weave the story together. 5 heads are better than 1. They don't have to think the same. And in fact, if they don't think exactly the same, then you get variety. And variety is exciting. So here is my question. And a couple of you answered. You walk into this tavern. And you can answer actually any of these questions. Or you can answer all 4 of the questions. What is the first thing that you notice? What is the second thing that you notice? What does the bartender look like? What does it sound like? Tell me. And let's see what some of these taverns look like. You don't even have to type it. You can just write it down. You can think it. You can tweet it if you want to. And tag me in it. Do all of them. But tell me what this tavern is like. Tell me what this tavern is like as if you are my party right now. I'll give it a minute. Sticky. Okay. There's glitter everywhere. There's a drunk bard heckling the actual band. That's interesting. The bartender looks suspiciously like someone my character used to go to school with. So they duck behind the table and hide their face. That's a fun prompt. Burly barkeep, greasy shirt, huge hands fumbling with very small cups. Have you ever seen an ogre barkeep? No? Why not? Let's see some of that. Give me an ogre barkeep that is extremely intellectual. There seems to be a folk duo playing on a slightly raised stage. They're pairing a fiddle and a banjo and playing something light. Literally. So I'm going to wait for 2 or 3 more, maybe. And then I'm going to do the thing I did before, and we're going to build something together. Because this is a prime example of how, even as the GM, you don't have to do everything on your own. The ogre barkeep definitely needs to be wearing a fez at a jaunty angle. I support that. I absolutely support that. The northern wall is full of taxidermy that is strictly composed of tiny woodland creatures. Which, you know what? It might make sense for the small cups. Barmaid Marshall's ale on a noble-looking patron. The ogre barkeep used to be a teacher. Huh. So right here, with everything you've said, and if you keep adding things, I will keep adding on to this story. So this. The next time you run a circumstance, the next time you run a session, or even not even the next time, one of the times you do, if you get a chance, try to do this sort of exercise with your party. You don't have to take all the suggestions, but let me know how it goes. But so right here, you walk into a tavern and there is glitter everywhere. It looks like there might have been an explosion of something in the corner. There is glitter dangling from the ceilings. And honestly, it's a little sticky. There's a drunk bard heckling the band that's playing on stage. And the bartender looks suspiciously like someone your character used to go to school with. And they duck behind a table and hide their face. But the barkeep is actually pretty burly. You can see a greasy shirt, and you can see their huge hands fumbling with very small cups above the counter. You look to the stage where the bard was heckling the band. And it seems to be a folk duo, and they're playing on a slightly raised stage. They're pairing a fiddle and a banjo, and there's a light ditty just going on in the air. You look at the barkeep a little bit closer, and you can see that there's definitely a fez sitting on the side of their head at a little bit of a jaunty angle. You look on the northern wall, and it actually doesn't seem to be very much covered in glitter, but it is covered in taxidermy that is tiny woodland creatures. The sticky floor causes the barmaid to slosh ale on a noble-looking patron. She stumbles, and honestly, the noble seems to just laugh. Then you look to the right, and there's actually a packed section of the wall that looks like it's fresher wood. It's hard to say whether it was burned or it's broken or being rebuilt, but it looks like the tavern's making renovations a little bit. The ogre lifts their head, and you catch a glimpse. And you do recognize them. It's actually someone that was a teacher where you had gone for schooling. You knew that they had retired and done something else, but you weren't sure what. So this right here. This was us creating the scope of what this tavern was from sitting and talking. And it's a very, very weird place. But there is so much to delve into here because so many of you gave ideas and input. And even if the ideas are far-fetched or kind of separated, it can come together. And that was just from me. That was just from me as a GM weaving it all together. But the party might actually help weave it even better. The party might have an idea of why there's a patch section with fresher wood. The party might have a better idea of who that drunk bard is heckling the band. The party might have an idea of who the band is. The party might have an idea why the small creatures are on the walls. It's called the social study. I like that name. Yeah, and that's a perfect example. Right then, maybe one of the party members might walk up and say, I need a quest to recover the missing woodland creature figure. There's one missing right in the center of the wall that you realize after looking closer. And I had no idea what this tavern was going to be when I was talking to all of you. I had no idea the ideas that you would come up with, and you are all chaotically creative. Own that. You are chaotically creative. But I knew that I wanted to build a tavern. And I had a couple questions. I had a scope of it. It was probably going to be strange. There was only so much that I wanted to actually affect. But I wanted you to build up on it. And right here, we came up with something fantastic. This is the collaborative world building that a GM can do with their party. We just did this together. And now you can do anything beyond that you would like. And we're going to keep diving into this. We're going to keep diving into this. Because this is how the scope of this session expands. And as the party is doing this, as they're building up this tavern, this also gives you time to sit back and watch it play out. Because as a GM, we get times to sit and watch and enjoy when they're narratively doing stuff. But when it's world building, we don't always get to sit and enjoy seeing the world be built. I love building worlds. Period. I also love building worlds with my party. I love seeing the ideas that they come up with. I love seeing the things that they build up. And I love seeing the new ideas they have. So let's figure out an encounter. Because we built this tavern. We built this tavern called the Social Study that has so much glitter and taxidermied creatures, and one of them is missing. So, something has taken this taxidermied creature. You find out the small creature, after asking around, the ogre barkeep stands up, and because they were a teacher, they do have a pretty good understanding of the world. They have a good understanding of creatures. They have a good idea of what it is. So, they tell you this creature is, let's see, it's a 6-legged squirrel with 3 tails and 3 eyes and crimson red fur. It's a very rare creature, actually. But rare in the sense that it's dangerous. And someone took it for some reason. Maybe they took it as bait for something. They know that there is one creature out in the woods that really loves this small rodent-like creature. And so they're trying to use this taxidermied version as bait. What sort of creature do you think wants to eat this? What sort of beast is this thing like? Is it a massive, enormous monster that hunts these small things because it's a delicacy? Or is it something of similar size that actually just hunts them because it likes the red fur and it hones in on that? Tsuchiniko. Ah, yes, okay, the giant snakes. And this is how we delve into the encounter building. Because I want to see the ideas that you all come up with, and we're going to go through a couple of them. But I'm going to keep talking to keep delving into it. What level of difficulty do you want your encounter to be? Do you want this to be a difficult circumstance? Do you want this to be a session where it's just interesting? Do you want this to be a deadly thing that they are walking into? And if it is dangerous, it's also, again, okay to tell them this is dangerous. Because that will change how prepared they are. If they can go into it knowing it's going to be a deadly circumstance, if they go into it knowing that there is a lot of danger, they can prepare for it. If they can go into it assuming that it's probably not, and when I say going into it, I mean the actual creature itself. There's always curveballs and twists and tricks to throw into it. And I support that. Because then you can catch them off guard and make it even more fun. But if they know that this thing is a massive creature that annihilates anything in its path and it enjoys this delicacy, versus saying there is a giant beast in the woods that's like a large snake, then they might react differently. And if they go in unprepared, sometimes going in unprepared because of not realizing can be very frustrating. And I hate seeing a frustrated party because of not realizing enough. That's true. They're not even necessarily hunting the creature, they are just hunting the thief. That's a good point. But okay, so it's a couple examples. Tsuchinoko, because it's like the mythical fat snake creature. A witch hunts the squirrels to use their third eye as a regent. That's interesting. I keep thinking of the rabbit from Monty Python. A snake who hones in on the red fur because they're green colorblind. Clever. Very clever. And it gives an opportunity for a couple of different routes if you wanted to give them that. For example, they can try to track the person who took it. Or they can try to track the creature that is going to hunt it. Because that creature might know how to find it. That creature might know the scent. They might need to know what area that creature is in, because then they know where to look. So how do you want to build this encounter is deciding what happens when they get there. Do you want a combat circumstance? Or do you want a circumstance where diplomacy is probably the best option? How desperate is the person who took this? How necessary was it for them to lure out whatever is looking for this creature? And if your party asks you, is this a dangerous situation? You don't directly have to say yes. You could say, there is an opportunity that this is very dangerous. Like there is a possibility that this can be dangerous. That doesn't eliminate danger as a possibility. What it does is it keeps in their mind, okay, something I still need to consider. If they ask that question and they're going into this encounter, if they hear actively, well, the thing that they're hunting, the thing that they're trying to lure out is usually a relatively peaceful creature. And it hunts this rodent just because it's one of its favorite meals. And it's something that's maybe the size of a dog. But its diet mainly comprises of, it's an omnivore and it eats smaller creatures. So chances are the party's not even in any danger. And if you tell them, well, it's probably not a very dangerous situation to you, per se. It depends on how you approach the person, I would say. So right off the bat, hearing that, if I heard that, my thought is, this is me. That's also why I try to actively say when I'm talking about opinions, because I'm trying to give you opinions and suggestions. I don't want you to ever feel like anything I'm saying is set in stone right, because I will never be the perfect GM for everyone, but you might in the way that you do something. You might be the perfect GM for someone that I'm not. When I hear that, my thought is, okay, I probably don't have to worry about attacking the creature. That's one thing less to worry about. What I need to figure out is how to approach this person. Then it shifts a little bit. What are they trying to find out about? They might have spent all this time figuring out all of these important details about this creature, but it might not actually matter. In the scope of the session, if they were finding out about this creature, it's nice to know that it's not dangerous. But then there's a lot of extra information that they're probably going to seek out that also you might not have. Giving them the notion of how important and how involved this creature is actually meant to be. Shifting the scope of the session back to this person. because this person is more of the focus. But if it's a witch needing regents, why is this person going to this witch? Then maybe the person is doing a favor for the witch. Then it's shifting that interest. Okay, it's not a creature that we're looking for. It is this entity, this person that needs this eye from this small rodent for something interesting. What can it be used for? Who is this witch? Where does she reside? How long has she been doing this? Is she dangerous? If she is dangerous, you could actively just say, this could be a very dangerous situation. Then they're going to be sneakier. They're probably going to think it through a little bit more. They're probably going to plan it out a little bit more. And if you allow them to be comfortable, if you get them comfortable, if you give them that understanding, that idea, they'll share their ideas with you. They'll share their plans with you. So then you know what to work with. Then they're giving you the scope to work with. And yeah, I like that. I like that. The ogre teacher barkeep might know what the eye could be used for. They might give you a hint. That's a circumstance where they came up with something that you can then use for the story. It didn't require you expanding the scope. It allowed you to reuse parts of the scope that are already built and then not have to build something else up new. Expand it. Reuse it. Give it a new use. Give it a new function. Revitalize it. So we have this tavern. We have this encounter. What else? Because after they get to this circumstance, after they get so far, this is assuming this is more of an open session. If this was something with a specific timeline, the scope of this all might not per se fit. Unless this could be a one shot actually, where you are just giving them the chance to run around and build this world. And I might plan to do something like that. I might plan to have a one shot where I simply have a bunch of prompts that I will ask my party. And then as they answer the prompts, we'll build the world. And it'll give me a chance to test my improv and them a chance to build this world. If you get that chance, try it, actually. Try it and let me know. Try a one shot, try a session, and then give your party a few more prompts. A few more prompts than usual. See how it goes. If you have a long-term campaign that you're doing and you just have a day for downtime, see how it goes. If you have a campaign that you're doing and it is on a specific adventure module, but there's one thing that's not necessarily as important, there's an area they go to and they're spending their downtime or doing something, try it. If you're playing a one-shot and you don't have a particular theme or idea you want for the one-shot, try it. Because it's not about them coming up with better ideas. It's about they might come up with an amazing idea you never considered. Because we all think differently. I literally started coming up with... I came up with an idea for mimics that replace a heart. They literally replace the heart, but then do the same functions, and the creature keeps living, but they're mimics that are an actual living heart. And I have, I'll see if they show up. That idea led to someone making like actual heart mimics for me, which, by the way, are amazing. And that is I'm gonna properly credit this person because credit artists for the thing that they do because it's important. That is Blikimor, Blikimor on Twitter. Fantastic designer, fantastic creator. Blown away. Yes, yeah. I even made eye mimics. So that was an idea that I had. And when I put that in the game, my party started to come up with interesting ideas for what to do with it. I already had a concept that I wanted them to, in the scope of this world, I wanted them to be essentially replacing vampires. I had the idea that I wanted them, because it's a heart, the heart is what moves blood through the body. The heart is essentially what keeps it moving. I say essentially, but it is. um, so with that, if they're the vampires, that's why they suck in blood, because they cannot create new blood because the body is essentially dead. The heart is, it's a replacement, but it's not actually doing the same thing. It's still pumping it through. And with that, I had the concept for what I wanted vampires to be in this world, and I just told the party that. Then they came across a circumstance where there was a body that was just entirely drained. And originally, the idea was just, it's a body that literally just suffered from drain magic, and that was all. There was a wild mage going around, and that was the extent of the scope that I had figured out. Well, let me tell you, they went above and beyond. Because I had told them about this previously, and it was the separation of player knowledge versus character knowledge. And the players were like, oh no. The players are like, what if it's that mimic heart thing Gabe was talking about? And let me tell you, it was not originally, but then it became that. And then they started to delve into it. I started to realize the scope of what they were interested in was changing. I didn't have to keep building up on what this town was, because I had started to figure out what the armorer did, what the blacksmith did, what the tailor was like, what the 3 different taverns' names were. And it was a lot of work. And it was great, but it was also exhausting. And I was overexerting myself. And then I was frustrated because I wanted there to be more, but the party wasn't necessarily interested in that. And if I wanted to invest them, I didn't want to force it. I wanted them to be invested because they wanted to delve into the town. But they were really interested in this thing. And something I could do was create this figure. Yes, Katie said it perfectly. My best DMing material comes from player conspiracy theories. Because they started investigating about what had drained this person. And then they found out that the person who was drained was actually a hired assassin. They found out who the hired assassin was paid to attack, and they found a small, well, it's kind of redundant, a gnome. They found a gnome who was a fighter. And on the surface, they looked relatively fine. But then when someone shook their hand, it was slightly cold. They thought, well, is this one of those, or is it actually a vampire? one of the characters had a very acute sense of hearing, and they were listening. And here's the thing I liked that was really interesting, that they gave me this prompt. If you inspire your characters to ask questions, and there is a balance between how many questions is reasonable and how many isn't. So sometimes a tip I would say is create a phrase for when you're doing a narrative moment. Like I will say the camera pans out, or the camera pans in, or the camera pans to the side. And then I'll even say like, and then the camera goes back to you all to trigger basically, this is when you're free to do whatever. Or I'll be like, I'll say like the camera pans over this figure, and then I'll describe them, and then I'll give all this narrative. So then they know it's that like unavoidable cutscene where you're narrating, and then it's a mutual understanding that this is something that's just happening, and they're not interrupting. And then after that, when they want to jump into it, when they want to ask, when they want to get involved, then they have that actual prompt to do so. But I described the character, and then I said, and then the camera pans back to you all. What do you do? With the character with a very acute sense of hearing and tremor sense decided to just listen. And when they listened, they were actually able to hear the heartbeat. And then they asked me a very interesting question. Is it a normal or an irregular heartbeat? That was a beautiful question. It was a beautiful question because the answer came out being it was an irregular heartbeat. Because this creature was alive and just doing whatever it wanted to. It wasn't beating like a normal heart because it's not a normal heart. Sometimes it would go fast, sometimes it would go quiet, or sometimes it would react in interesting and strange ways, and sometimes it would just be normal. And I was so excited. And it showed me how interested they were about this character. The tattletale heart. So here's another question. And it's less of a prompt, but more of an actual question. What is the scope of the individual things your party has interest in? And it's not a single question. It's more of an internal question. Poe excuse for a heart. I'm so proud of you. What is the scope of how much they want to delve into a character? What is the scope of how much they want to delve into a town? What is the scope of how much they want to delve into this lore of an area? Determine the scope of where they want to go, how much they want to expand, where they're interested, and then build from there. As a designer, as a writer, as a creator, scope is a huge part of my day-to-day. Scope is a huge part of what I do because I have to figure out how big something is going to be, how invested in something I'm going to be, how much to write for something, how much to plan for something, how much to come up with an artistic representation of something, how much backstory to make for something. And that plays into me being a GM so much. So let's figure out the scope of the stuff that we made. We have a tavern, we have an encounter, and we have a little bit of backstory. So since we're part of the way through, I'm gonna do a little bit of a switch. I'm gonna answer a couple questions now. So I'll answer 3 questions that we have so far. And then we're gonna take a short break to hydrate. And then we're gonna come back. Because breaks are important. We've been sitting here for a bit over an hour. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for sticking through, and let's get through the rest. So first question. What notes do you tend to find essential as you prepare a scenario? How do you tend to boil down essential information to be accessible in the moment as you are running a game? So that's a good question. Wow, I sound just like anyone else. So first, the notes that I find essential are related to the scope of what I want to run and what my party wants to do. So if I know I don't want to run a situation with very much combat, sometimes I'll come up with like general ways to guide around circumstances. So I'll have a couple notes, maybe 5 or 6 different ways that if something doesn't happen, for something to move the story forward. I'll have a magical message is delivered. I'll have a bird deliver something. I'll have an NPC runs up and tells them something. And I won't name that either, because the NPCs that they interact with, the NPCs that they get to know, can be different people. And if I maybe decide, you know what, this NPC Derek is going to come run up and talk to them, but they are very invested in the NPC Patricia that they talked to previously, it would make sense for it to be Patricia. Patricia is someone they trust, they're involved with, they're invested in, and then when Patricia comes and tells them, then it's something of importance. It gives it weight. So I would give notes on how to move the story forward if you're not sure about them getting to that point. Ways to motivate them, ways to inspire them. And then have a point A and a point B. And anything in between is how you want to make it happen, or how the party makes it happen. Which is why I say having those things to progress it are so important. Because getting from point A to point B is the important part. If you only have one way to do it, that's okay. If you have 2 ways to do it, that's okay. If you have 4 ways to do it, that's okay. If you have no defined way to get there, that's okay. Because what matters is getting them to that point. And it doesn't have to be a specific location. It's just an end result for the story. They might get there. They might get to a location you wanted before you intended, and you still have an hour or 2 left. So if the end is the goal, push the goal a little bit. Come up with a list for yourself of ways to progress the story, or ways that the story could be extended. If your goal was for them to get to a specific place, and they got there, they were supposed to retrieve this item, and they got there literally an hour, real time, before you expected them to get there. Look at your little list of ways to extend that. Maybe somebody stole it. Maybe it's destroyed. Maybe it's a fake. And then work with that. See how they plan it out. See how they plan forward and work around that. They get there and it's actually a fake and they discover it. Then they'll go back somewhere. Then they'll start looking around. Then they'll start asking questions, or at least be unsure of what the right choice is. And in this moment, you have complete flexibility because you can change anything that you want. An idea they have, someone mentioned the player conspiracy theories, that can easily become true. If someone says, you know what? I bet you it was Derek, actually. It can be Derek. Maybe Derek replaced this. Maybe Derek stole it. And if the players, like, if the party in general just starts coming up with ideas of how it happened, go with it. The notes that I find essential are the ones for how to get people to where I want them to be and how to potentially extend on making something last. Because if I can drive them there, I can work on it more. And if they get there, I can figure out how to extend that. But in between, all the nitty-gritty stuff is pretty much to them. Pulling up stats for a creature is relatively easy. Coming up with an idea for a location, if you have a bunch of different ideas or a bunch of different picture references, that's perfect. You might have a bunch of different maps. For me, the hardest thing is being prepared to make it still keep flowing. And for boiling down the essential information so that it's accessible, I might just have a Word document open for myself. Or if I'm on Roll20, I might have a document literally inside of my journal, pull it up. And as I do more of that stuff, as I add more to it, make another journal that all the players have access to. And I even said it in the last video, and I'll probably say it a couple more, make a shared journal. So that as ideas are coming through, as people are coming up with ideas, theories, you can work with those. Imagine having a specific shared journal for your party that is about different theories they have of what's happening in the story. I challenge you at some point to have a moment like that. Ask them what their theories are. Tell them to write down their theories. And then take some of the stuff from it. If they have all of these theories pulled together, and then you look at it and you're thinking, interesting, I like that. So next question. As a map maker, which application do you like to use? Do you prefer to kit bash? I actually do like to kit bash. I like to kit bash because then, even if I'm already using something that exists, I can add my own twist to it. I am not as creative in the artistic sense. So drawing a map myself is not something that happens very easily. But if I have pieces from this beautiful forest dwelling, and I have pieces from a fantastic town, if I bring them together, then I get that circumstance of, oh, I can make a woodland town. I can make a place where the forest sprites live. So honestly, I don't have a single preference. Because if I have other ideas to pull from, then it's what gets my brain working. And in one of the next Tabletop Tabletalks, we're going to sit down and we're going to make a map. We're going to make a map and a couple encounters to go with it. Because after we're talking about scope, why wouldn't we build something together, actually? I'm excited to see what we build together, but I'm also terrified because you have all proven to be both creative and chaotic. You are chaotically creative. And I'm a fan of it. Of course, I'm slipping into future hype. I can't help myself. But I build maps on Roll20 all the time. And like I said, sometimes I just build them for me so that I can have a visual understanding of what it looks like. Catch me making a shirt for you all. Question: the balance between railroad and sandbox is really tough for me. Do you have any suggestions? Yes, I have a bunch. Um, so I'm just gonna start listing them off. Number one, who? Number one, as you figure out what balance you're working in, it's okay to start relying on the characters and party for it, or at least talk it through with them, or even specifically say before the session, this is where I would like you all to be by like the second or third hour. And you don't even have to tell them what the name of it is. I played in a session I played in a session recently where ahead of the game, the GM told us, I'd like you all to be at, and I'm going to change some of the words. They essentially, they said, I'd like you all to be at the cave by like the break. And we were like, you know what? Okay, cool. Got it. The cave. We'll keep that in mind. We can do that. Now, we didn't know what the cave was, but we were already investigating something and we're learning more and more about it. And as we learned more and more about it, we came up across a name. And that name, when we delved into it, we learned the name was a cave. So that's where they wanted us to be. And we had that information, and it was good we had that information, because we still had like an hour and 20 minutes or something, right? And that gave us as the party a good gauge of where the GM wanted us to be to drive the story. But we also had an idea, okay, actually, we have a decent amount of time before we were wanted to be there, before like in story we needed to be there. If you give them that chance to have an idea of where you want them to be, or what you want to happen, or what you would like to see progress, they can keep that in mind as they're doing things. They can keep that in mind as they're acting. If you say, I would like this session to be on the castle, and then like at the end of the session I would like to see us moving out of the castle. Then it's a sense of like urgency, immediacy, and trying to get things done. So the second thing for Railroad and Sandbox, guiding them in ways that don't necessarily feel like pushing them is hard, but important. The previous example was, if they want to explore, let them explore the thing and then make something happen during their exploring that brings them back. If they're having a conversation with the shopkeep and you want them to be reaching this specific location because there is a cursed location to explore, create encounter triggers for those moments. They're sitting in the shop and talking and laughing and everything is happening. And then give a prompt while it's happening. Oh yeah, you know what I like? I think I'm going to get this armor, and then. And then at that moment, all of you hear what sounds like a scream. It doesn't have to be, yes, very similar to the Dragon Heist Fireball. It doesn't have to be interrupting, almost. Find a way to slide it in, because there is always a pause in conversation. Pause. In that moment, you all hear a scream. And with that scream, you hear someone yelling, Jason came out of the cursed field, but he's not the same. 9 out of 10 times, I would be convinced the party will go explore. 1 out of 10 times they might explore, and you might have to make Jason come barreling in as a cursed abomination. Okay, so Steve made a fantastic comment. I'd love to foster more chaotically creative engagement with my players and maybe less creatively chaotic moments. Yes. Yes, I get that. So with that circumstance, they are being pulled into the outside circumstance. They're being pulled into the outside encounter to investigate. They're stopping what was pulling away from potentially the sandbox. It was pulling away from the focus and then focusing on the sandbox. You're pulling them back into the story. You're allowed to make prompts to pull your characters back into the story. You're allowed to come up with the ideas to pull your characters back into the story. You're allowed to want to pull them back into this narrative that you are building together. You're allowed to do that. Because as people, we get distracted. We find other things we want to focus on. We find other things that we're really interested in. We might love, oh my gosh, this shiny rock. I know there's a demon, but that shiny rock. I see the demon, but the shiny rock. The demon is big, but the shiny rock. It's got huge horns, but this rock is so shiny. Why is this rock glowing red? Oh no, the rock is now in the hands of the demon. I guess I have to kill the demon. Right there. If they have a focus, use that focus to bring it into the narrative. Blend it together. When you are a GM, I wouldn't say it's your job to make all of this stuff happen. I would say we rely. Well, let me phrase that. The party relies on us to blend the story. They're going to do dozens of things you don't expect and find investment in many things that may not actually be what you were planning, expecting, or really looking for. But if you grab a hold of that and put it with the rest of the narrative, they're already invested in it. And now they're invested in the narrative because you blended in something that they cared about. So we've got about 20 minutes. So I'm going to actually take a couple more questions because I feel like that has worked really well. Yeah. You don't have to be the one that's telling the story. You can be the one that's blending it together and then guiding it to the next piece. Because the characters have a story to tell. The characters have a story that they want to see come to fruition. These characters are alive. How can you help tell this story? How can you help blend it together? How can you help weave it together? It's not just on you. All right. The difference between consequences versus punishment versus incentives, especially in a good versus evil world ending scenario that has a clock. I know I struggle with having specific clocks sometimes, and I'm way better with it than I used to be. Oof, way better. So let's dive into that. Punishment is hard when any player feels like they have to suffer for a choice that they made. And depending on the group that you have, the levels of punishment will vary. And it's part of why when I had an NPC that was killed, that was the mentor of a player's character, I asked ahead of time if it was okay when that happened. Because there's plenty of other things that could happen. They could have been trapped. They could have been lost. They could have been teleported anywhere else. But if they had felt punished for not doing this thing, it would have been hard. I think a large difference when you're GMing a session between punishment and consequences is knowledge. If you tell a party there is a solid chance that this person will die if you do not rescue them in time, and they do not rescue them in time, it is a consequence of that situation. But you are not seeking to punish them for not doing it because they had the knowledge of it being a possibility. If they have an idea of what a circumstance is going to be, yeah, exactly. Like if you tell them a situation is dangerous, if they have an idea of the danger that is there and a bad thing happens related to that danger, and it's on par with it, it's not saying, you know what, someone could get sick if they go here and then the character dies. But if you say that this is a deadly sickness and the character dies, it becomes a consequence of how it happened versus going there unprepared for it, without the same awareness, without the same information, and then being punished for it. Because if we're doing something bold and creative, we don't necessarily want to deal with a frustrating, sad punishment if we weren't aware of how heavy the scale was. It's that idea of communication. If I communicate that this is a situation, if I communicate, like for example, Majora's Mask talks about the moon is coming down and you have so long to prevent it, you have a specific amount of time and you can rewind time. And if you do nothing, the moon crashes and the game ends. It's a consequence of not doing anything because I actively knew that that was going to happen. But if I was playing the game and had no idea that was going to happen, I just knew it was getting closer and closer, and then I didn't do the actions that it had suggested, not told me that I should do. It was like, these are things that you can, maybe not even suggested, mentioned that I could do. If it mentioned that these were possibilities of things I could do, and then certain point happens and the game ends, it's a punishment for not doing those things because I wasn't aware of the weight they held. If I had an inkling of the weight they held and then I still chose not to do it, then it's a consequence. If you had a great evil that was going to rise in 9 days and the party did nothing to prevent it, it's a consequence. But if the great evil is coming and it's we'll stick with 9 days. And the party didn't go into this room that told them the great evil was coming. They actually went into the other room and then left. It may feel like a punishment, and you punishments can also come from knowledge later on. To be clear, if they didn't go to that room and then the great evil rises and causes terror, and you tell them it's because they didn't go into the room, it's punishing them for not doing something that we wanted them to do, that we expected them to do. Because they're only human, they're only people. If I made if I make a NPC to join the party, and then the NPC decides to feed them to a demigod of rage and anger. But the party didn't do anything for it. It was just a twist of how it happened. And then 3 of the characters died. I'm more punishing the party than making it a consequence. In that circumstance, it was just someone that they allowed to be with them. And then I would have made the active choice to do this harsh thing. And it could be a twist, but if I tell them, well, you should have checked. You didn't look into his background. You actually didn't ask enough questions. I'm punishing them. It's not a consequence of what they did. It's a lot of communication. And if you feel like something bad is going to happen because they don't have all of the information, give them the information. That's a difference in GMing when it's, I don't like the concept of party versus GM. And that is what that is. You are having them work against you intentionally. But if you work together with them, you're the allies that they have. You are also the enemies they have, but you are the allies. You are working with them. And as the GM, you're weaving this story together. And if they succeed, that means that you helped them succeed. You helped them get to that point. You helped them have that moment of pure joy, pure excitement, and pure satisfaction. You won together. Because I would say if a character dies and the player is sad, so am I. We win together and we lose together. In my book, that's what a good GM does. That's what a good GM is. We play together and we win together and we lose together. Next question. When is it okay to just say there's nothing here when the players are really sure of it versus making everything pay off? I think it's always okay. That's a prime way of actively telling them that there's more to see elsewhere. If they are searching through a room looking for all of the hidden secrets, and you actively say there's nothing else here. It could be when they're looking in desperation, or if they're like intentionally trying to find something. If you really want to make it pay off, it goes back to the idea of the player conspiracy theories. Build off of something they said. If you want there to be a switch, there could be. There could be a switch that they were looking for everywhere, and in that moment, they're like, you know what? I actually tried all of these books. And then maybe one of them works. Maybe that is what speeds up the circumstance. They're spending all this time in this room and not delving into the other stuff. So then you're changing the scope from this whole building to this actual single room is where they needed to be. This room was where they find that hidden globe instead of actually in the dungeon, in the basement. But if there's nothing beyond there after they've looked, after they've looted, after they've gathered everything, I genuinely feel like it's okay to always say there's nothing there. There's nothing else there. There's nothing else to explore. Because that meta knowledge isn't bad to have. Then that means if they go back there, there's a specific intent. They don't have to continuously wonder, are they keeping something? Is there a secret? And if they don't know, they might keep rolling forever into infinity. Next question. And so, okay, so a side note, I don't think that there's anything wrong with the concept of the GM versus player, but it doesn't mean that's what someone wants to do. Because in that concept, there is a lot of. Okay, so if that's the last one, then I'll delve into that for the last bit. In the GM versus player, I haven't been a fan because with my personal experience, it's often a conflict of communication and conversation and a lack of that. I enjoy sharing secrets with my party, but I'm allowed to have my own. If I go into it trying to eliminate them, trying to cause trouble for them, then I am not the person with the story. I am instead the instigator. And it can create a lot of hostile emotions that I have been in circumstances with. There are tables that I will never go back to because in GM versus player, it can also often be about blame. Versus why I say I am playing with them. I am removing myself from the entity of this big bad that is trying to eliminate them. Because then it's not Gabe that's doing it, it's Valgur. If it is Gabe that is fighting against the players, if it's Gabe that's fighting against the party, then it's a different circumstance. And there are ways to negotiate it, and there are ways around it, and there are ways to work with it. But it's also about consent, conversation, and understanding, and the ability to separate that mindset. And some of us have a hard time doing it, especially if we're invested in the characters or the world or what we build. So Steve asked a good question. I love the way you've made this interactive. Did this go at all like you imagined? This was very close to how I write my sessions. I had a few paragraphs of notes, and then I figured I wanted it to be a conversation with interaction. I said it earlier, said it again. I've watched plenty of shows like this where all someone does is they talk at you. And talking is great because I like listening, which is why I watch shows and have podcasts. But I can't just listen. If I can feel involved, if they ask me a question that makes me think, if they ask me a question that's something that I can use and take into whatever I'm doing, then I feel like I got something. And I want you, when you come here and sit and listen and discuss and talk to me, I want you to feel like you got something out of this. I want you to feel like maybe there's a new idea you can use when you're GMing. Maybe there's a new twist to stuff that you can do. Maybe there's something that you can do to make your life a little bit easier. Maybe you can actually ask your party prompts. Maybe they'll come up with something amazing that you had never considered. Maybe they'll come up with a tavern like we had. I want you to leave any of these circumstances feeling like in this conversation, you got something out of it. That is the most important thing for me. Because you all are chaotically creative. So next week, yes, straight mark. So next week, we're going to talk about finding the game for you in a world of near infinite choices. Because there are so many games to play, there are so many choices, and finding the one for you and potentially your party might be hard to do. So I have a little checklist that we'll talk about that involves different styles of play. It'll relate to the scope of the game. It'll relate to the tone of the game. I feel like by now you can probably see how these sessions are starting to come together. And if you have any other questions, feel free to message me on Twitter. I'll save some of your questions for the next circumstance. Stay chaotically creative. And just keep creating things. You have an infinite capacity to grow, develop, and become even better. And as you ask these questions and have these conversations, maybe you'll inspire someone else to start GMing. I'll catch you next time on Tabletop Tabletalk. Thank you for joining.